Nonverbal learning disorder and autism. We're going to talk about it. Let's go. Welcome. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Orion Kelly, that autistic guy. I'm all about helping you raise your level of understanding, acceptance, and appreciation of the autistic community. So if that sounds like something you're interested in being a part of, subscribe to my channels, Orion Kelly, that autistic guy, and Orion Kelly podcasts. Nonverbal learning disorder, NVLD, and autism. Let's explore it, my friends, and start with what is nonverbal learning disorder? So, in basic terms, nonverbal learning disorder is a neurological condition that affects a person's ability to understand and process non-verbal information. Now, NVLD can present in many different ways, but there are some common signs. So let's talk about them. People with non-verbal learning disorder may have difficulty understanding facial expressions, even body language. Again, things that are non-verbal. You also will have difficulties with understanding social cues. Non-verbal learning disorder also throws up a difficulty with spatial reasoning. You may experience difficulties with motor coordination. You may in fact be clumsy or prone to accidents. Those with non-verbal learning disorder may also find it hard to follow directions. You may experience difficulty making friends. It can also cause you to be socially awkward, even withdrawn. Now, listening to that list, I bet you're saying, wow, non-verbal learning disorder and autism seem like they have lots of similarities. Did I say that right? Similarities. Oh, by the way, both sounded creepy. True, NVLD and autism do share some similarities. However, they are distinct, separate conditions with different diagnostic criteria. Let's explore some of the key differences between non-verbal learning disorder and autism. So NVLD is primarily a disorder, condition, challenge of non-verbal information processing. On the other hand, as you may well know, autism is a far more complex condition affecting multiple domains: neurological development, social interaction and communication, sensory sensitivities, repetitive and restrictive behaviors. Non-verbal learning disorder is characterized by a weakness in spatial awareness and visual perception. In other words, challenges in motor coordination and difficulty with the non-verbal side of social interactions and communication. Whereas autism is more broadly categorized as difficulties in social interaction, communication, sensory, and all the other aspects of being autistic. Another key difference is people with non-verbal learning disorder may in fact have normal language skills. On the other hand, some autistic people can struggle with both verbal and non-verbal, non-speaking language skills. This is more of a nuanced difference because clearly people with non-verbal learning disorder have challenges in social interaction and communication. However, even though people with NVLD have challenges with social interaction, they are still generally more aware of the different aspects of communication than, say, autistic people. Another difference, people with NVLD may often be quite good at rote memory, even excelling in tasks that involve verbal or auditory processing. On the other hand, autistic people may have challenges, may struggle with particular tasks that require more flexibility of thinking, problem solving, even things that incorporate executive functioning skills. Another clear difference between people with non-verbal learning disorder and autistic people, again, is because it's such a broad condition, autism, rather than such a specific condition, NVLD, some of these things obviously make sense, but still, I guess, worth pointing out. People with NVLD who are not autistic, now, of course, some can be both, we'll get to that soon, may simply have a better sense of what is appropriate socially. In other words, the etiquette, the rules, the conventions of communication and social interaction. They struggle with verbal stuff, but they still get the rules of the game. Now, conversely, autistic people may struggle in that setting. We clearly have challenges with social interactions and communication. Even if someone thinks, in a well-meaning way, they're giving us explicit instructions on how to navigate that social situation. Kind of like telling someone who's never flown a plane before, this is how you fly a plane, and then putting them in the cockpit and saying, okay, Go and fly the plane now, Captain. You told me once. I've never done this before. You sure I'm going to be okay? Yeah. I gave you explicit instructions. You're fine. Interestingly, nonverbal learning disorder can actually be more associated with motor difficulties and poor coordination. I find this kind of a fascinating thought or idea. How can you compare it? Well, so maybe autistic people don't necessarily struggle as much with motor coordination or motor skills, because in fact you could just say we have simply different or unusual movements, different or unusual motor skills, because we have a different brain. As autistic people, due to things like alexithymia, we may have difficulties in interpreting, processing, expressing our emotions or the emotions of others, whereas a person who simply has nonverbal learning disorder would not have these same types of challenges. In other words, they should potentially be more emotionally expressive. But again, everyone's different, and these are just general, really basic differentials. The final difference, before we get onto the challenges of daily life with nonverbal learning disorder, and also the connection between NVLD and autism, is around diagnostics. As you probably know, ASD, as it's referred to in the DSM-5, autism spectrum disorder, is a well-established diagnosable condition. Now, at the time of recording this, and I may well be wrong, but it's my understanding that nonverbal learning disorder is not actually an individually recognised disorder as per the DSM-5. However, NVLD is recognised as a condition that can cause significant challenges, and in fact is sometimes diagnosed as a separate condition or as a subtype of autism. Nonverbal learning disorder can really present so many challenges, so many impacts on your daily life. So let's discuss some of the core challenges people with NVLD may face. Emotional difficulties. This is a big one. People with NVLD may experience anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Clearly, due to the challenges they face navigating social interactions, even academic or workplace settings. Let's dig deeper into the academic difficulties. Think about it. If you're trying to learn something new, don't you think if you have nonverbal learning disorder, you are going to have difficulties with subjects that actually require non-verbal skills? This may include things like maths, science, really any unit or subject that incorporates forms of spatial reasoning. Big costs involved in these difficulties. You can plain and simple just fail assessments, fail entire units, struggle to keep up with the pace of the learning. This is something I can absolutely relate to. Struggling to keep up with the rest of your classmates. Often requiring extra help from teachers, tutors, lecturers, even though we know that that's very hard to actually get. Another challenge of nonverbal learning disorder is with our social difficulties. As we know, people with NVLD can struggle with social cues. If you struggle with social cues and these non-verbal forms of communication, you're going to struggle to maintain, keep friendships. And the bottom line is it just puts you back in a bad old universe of isolation, loneliness, good plain old darkness, as well as, and this is very common, potentially being subject to bullying, even peer rejection. Motor coordination difficulties is another challenge experienced by people with non-verbal learning disorder. And this is based on the idea that you will struggle with motor coordination. These then manifest into experiences of clumsiness, poor balance, and difficulties with fine motor skills. This causes massive challenges, right? Okay, so you're going to have a difficulty with basic everyday activities, sports, arts, crafts, creativity, even everyday tasks. The little things like tying your own shoelaces, doing up your own buttons. This means that you, in effect, aren't able to participate in everyday activities that, again, further isolate you. The final challenge, before we talk about the connection between non-verbal learning disorder and autism, is around executive function difficulties. People with NVLD are definitely going to experience some form of executive function difficulties. I'm talking about things like planning, time management, organizing things. Ultimately, making it even harder to do things that people expect you to do, like completing tasks, staying on track staying focused, and in many aspects of life, including home, work, school, meeting the demands and the deadlines placed upon you. So how is NVLD and autism connected? We could talk about that if you'd like. I guess. So nonverbal learning disorder and autism are both developmental conditions that can both actually affect your social interaction, communication, and I guess more broadly, your overall behavior as a person. There is some evidence that nonverbal learning disorder is more common in autistic people. In 2019, there was a study, I believe, that found about 38% of autistic people also had nonverbal learning disorder, compared to only 2.9% of the general population. And exploring that connection further, let's talk about some of the clear overlaps, starting with the obvious one, social communication and interaction difficulties. Pretty obvious, people with NVLD and people who are autistic both experience significant challenges in social interaction and communication. And further, both those with NVLD and autistic people can struggle with things like nonverbal cues, body language, these signs you experience in social interactions and communication. Facial expressions, I almost forgot that one. These are areas experienced by both. There's also an overlap between rigidity and routines. Whether you have NVLD or you're autistic, there does seem to be some sort of overlap in this need, this strong preference for routines and sameness. And when they're disrupted, it seems to cause distress in either condition. In some recent neuroimaging studies, it has been suggested that there may be some shared neurobiological features between autistic people and those with NVLD. And these shared features are particularly apparent in the brain regions involved in social cognition and executive functioning. Some researchers have even proposed that there may be a continuum of social communication challenges that actually encompasses both conditions. This video alone is probably enough to realize that distinguishing between nonverbal learning disorder and autism can be a real challenge. Made worse, obviously, by the fact there is still really no clear consensus on the diagnostic criteria for nonverbal learning disorder. What happens? The worst stuff. This can lead to misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, wrong diagnosis, general confusion, especially since people with NVLD can actually exhibit really similar traits to that of autistic people. Now, what else do you want to talk about? Is there something you'd really like me to dive into, to explore, to get to the bottom of that's on your mind related to neurodivergence and autism? If there is, please, let's see those topic suggestions in the comments below. I really do appreciate you watching this video. Thank you so much for your support. Till my next video, we'll talk soon.